Now take a good look at this kid. Is he friendly? Or is he fussy? It's really just a matter of perspective. You know that thing where two groups of people are in a heated disagreement and both sides just think that the other side is a bunch of dummies who don't know anything? Who am I kidding? This is the internet, and of course that doesn't happen here. But then, purely hypothetically, let's just imagine that we have two groups who are in a heated debate. Of course, both sides know that they have the entire truth, and that the other side only has a different opinion because they don't have all the information. So both sides spend time hurling facts at each other in order to educate their ignorant opponents. Well, in this hypothetical scenario, both sides have missed what the actual argument is about. It's rarely just a case of giving the other side the straight facts, but both sides in this case have gotten so tangled up in assuming that the other side is willfully ignorant that they failed to understand what is actually at the root of their disagreement. As a result, they've wasted a lot of time talking past each other instead of making actual progress towards a resolution. Luckily, in his Grammar of Motives, dear friend of the show Kenneth Burke introduces a couple of concepts that can help us to get to the bottom of serious issues like these and actually resolve these debates by understanding where the other people are coming from and then taking practical steps to resolve such deep divides. And really, that's one of the primary goals of this show, to share the kinds of rhetorical techniques and concepts that will help people to deal more productively and harmoniously with the real disagreements that they face in everyday life. And if that's the sort of utopian errand that appeals to you, then I hope you'll consider subscribing so that you can keep up to date with all of the latest. Now, Burke discusses another purely hypothetical disagreement in order to illustrate his points, and that's the disagreement between the religious who believe in creation and the scientific who believe in evolution. Normally, it seems like both of these groups tend to see the other as just willfully ignorant. If only the religious people could open their eyes to the facts, say the scientists, and on the other hand, if only the scientists could just open their eyes to the truth, say the religious people. But like with so many issues, this basic understanding of the problem is actually a misunderstanding of the problem, and it prevents anyone from making real progress because they're too busy dealing with things that aren't actually at the root of the disagreement. But we have the rhetorical tools to understand a debate like this one more deeply, so let's start breaking it down. So to begin with, the evolution and creation groups are both looking at planet Earth and just drawing different conclusions about how it came to be. So really, this debate can't be about who has the facts and who doesn't, because both groups are working with the same set of data. What's really going on is a debate that hinges on a fundamental difference between the two groups' understanding of the facts. As Burke puts it, dramatistically considered, there is a tremendous difference between the creation and the process of evolution as motivational summations. One sums up in terms of action, the other in terms of motion. And this action versus motion distinction is an important one. In fact, it's the key difference in this debate between team evolution and team creation, but it also sits at the root of many other serious debates, which we'll talk about later. For now, it's important to understand that Burke defines action as anything that happens as the result of agency, or somebody's deliberate decision to do something. So when I throw a chocolate bar at you, that's an action. Or when I hold my breath to stop the hiccups, that's also an action. And it's an action when you turn on a light to read a book, when you step on the brake to avoid hitting a squirrel, or when you comment on a video to show your support. And thanks, by the way. But motion happens without agency. Really, it's just the result of natural processes and laws. So if I lose my grip on a chocolate bar and it falls down, that falling is not an action, it's just a motion that happens thanks to gravity. And similarly, getting the hiccups is not a deliberate force of will on anyone's part, it's just the natural motion of bodily processes. Similarly, a filament heating up when an electric current passes through it is motion. Combustion, driving pistons in a car, is motion. And the chemical reward that your brain gives you when somebody leaves a nice comment on something that you posted is the product of neurochemical motion, not deliberate action. And this is the same distinction that's at work, according to Burke, in a debate between evolution and creation. Both groups are looking at the same set of data, a planet full of hawks, rivers, and portobello mushrooms. But people with a creation perspective see all of those things as the result of action. To them, life exists because of the agency of a creator. And people with an evolution perspective see those same facts as motion. Life just exists because that's what happens when enough molecules bump into each other over enough time in the right conditions. It just happens. But why, you might be asking? How can two groups of people look at the same set of data and draw such vastly different conclusions? Well, that's a great question, and it leads us into our next key concept. Let's imagine that you have a super cool telescope with an adjustable zoom. In order to test it out, you go on a quick telescoping tour of the neighborhood and see that your friend Terrence is sitting under a tree in his yard reading a book. Of course, Terrence has good taste in books, so you zoom in super close to see what he's reading. While you're zoomed in close, you see that an apple falls out of the tree above him and bonks him on the head. Ouch! It's an unfortunate event, but as far as you can see through your telescope, the apple just fell, as they're known to do, and Terrence was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Clearly, it was just the result of motion. It's just one of those things that happen. But now, let's imagine that perhaps in a parallel reality, you weren't zoomed in as close. With a wider scene available to your view, you see that the apple did not just fall. In fact, Terrence's sister Lucy was hiding on the roof. She shot the apple out of the tree with her slingshot so that it would fall on her brother's head. With a more zoomed out perspective, the same scene now looks a lot more like the result of action than a simple accident of motion. And this little scene illustrates an important rhetorical point. When we change our scope on the issue or alter the circumference of our perspective, then it also changes the possible interpretations that are available to us. In the first super zoomed in version, it all looked like motion because there was no evidence to support any conclusions to the contrary. But from a more zoomed out perspective, we might see more clearly that it was the product of action. In fact, Lucy shot the apple so that it would hit her brother in the head. Or perhaps if we zoomed in again, but somewhere else, we might see more clearly that Lucy did in fact shoot the apple, but she didn't do it so that it would hit her brother. That was just a product of motion. Either way, it's clear that our understanding of events really depends on what we're paying attention to. So in Burke's words, one may place the object of one's definition in contexts of varying scope. And our remarks on the scene-act ratio, for instance, suggest that the choice of circumference for the scene in terms of which a given act is to be located will have a corresponding effect upon the interpretation of the act itself. So the scope of your perspective on a particular issue will then influence the ways that you could possibly interpret those events. And this is what's really going on in the creation-evolution debate. It's not just that one side has facts that the other side is rejecting. As Burke points out, the real issue is that the two sides are essentially seeing the same set of facts through different telescopes, and that's influencing their interpretation of the origins of life. That is, scientific people are looking at the world through a narrow, zoomed-in telescope that only permits them a view of the natural world. Religious people, on the other hand, are looking at life through a more zoomed-out telescope that not only allows for the natural world, but leaves room for the supernatural as well. So, with the narrow telescope of science, people can only see what is observable in the natural world. That is, from their perspective, only the incremental processes of evolution are visible, so they have to conclude that it's just a biological process of natural motion. But then, according to Burke, with their wider telescope, religious people are willing to consider the possibility of a supernatural reality that exists alongside the natural world. With that perspective, they can see the influence of a supernatural being acting on the observable facts of the natural world, and as a result, they cannot see it all as merely motion, and they have to conclude that it's all the intentional product of supernatural action. So you can see that this whole debate is really not as simple as one side refusing to accept the other side's facts. What's really going on is a fundamental difference in how these two groups see the world, and that is leading to a dramatic difference in how they interpret the world. So if either side is going to persuade the other of anything, they're going to have to take this foundational difference of scope into account. That is, before they can figure out what they're going to do about creation or evolution, they have to figure out what they're going to do about their different telescopes. Now, Burke begins the chapter on scope by saying, men seek for vocabularies that will be faithful reflections of reality. To this end, they must develop vocabularies that are selections of reality. And any selection of reality must, in certain circumstances, function as a deflection of reality. Insofar as the vocabulary meets the needs of reflection, we can say that it has the necessary scope. In its selectivity, it is a reduction. Its scope and reduction become a deflection when the given terminology or calculus is not suited to the subject matter which it is designed to calculate. That is, every argument we make involves a choice about scope. Ideally, we'll choose a scope that accurately reflects the facts of the case, and people generally aren't going to choose a scope that they know is wrong, so we can't just assume that they're stupid or bad. That means that our first step is going to be understanding the reality from the perspective of their scope and ours. Additionally, every choice to talk about one thing is also a choice not to talk about everything else. So each scope is also a selection of reality, or a way of limiting the infinity of possibilities into a single focused, finite topic of discussion. And as we've seen, the selection of a scope can drastically alter a person's interpretation of reality. Because of that, it's important to be mindful of the potential risk that each choice of scope has to become a distortion, and to recognize that the right balance depends on each situation. That is, there is no universally correct choice of scope. A scope that is too wide can be just as much a distortion of reality as a scope that is too narrow. It's something that has to be figured out and renegotiated each time tensions arise. So all of this is to say that the debate between advocates of creation and advocates of evolution isn't really about creation or evolution at all. It's actually a debate at its most basic level about the most appropriate scope for looking at the origins of life. On one hand, you have a group of people who think that excluding anything except for those things that are observable through the five senses is way too narrow of a scope. And on the other, you have people who think that the consideration of realities beyond the five senses is way too broad. Until they can come to some kind of mutual understanding about scope, though, they'll never be able to come to any kind of joint conclusion about the true origins of life. Of course, differences in scope are at the root of many ongoing issues, so it's a helpful tool to help us to understand current debates. For example, the debate about climate change is often a debate between a narrow scope view that sees rising temperatures as a direct result of human action, and is therefore something that requires immediate and vigorous human response, and a broader scope view that sees rising temperatures as a recurring cycle of natural motion, which to them is something that requires much less of a response. Finding a practical solution to the problem isn't going to be feasible until the differences in scope and the resulting different interpretations of human agency can be reconciled. The ongoing debate about systemic injustice is also often marked by differences in scope. The narrow scope view sees injustice as an interpersonal problem closely tied with individual agency. The broader scope view sees injustice as something more like the motion of large institutions and cultures which transcends that individual agency. And that's why one person can see their neighbors all getting along and say that there isn't a problem, while another person can see whole regions of a country that are more affluent than another and say that there continues to be a real and pressing problem. Now, these are both, of course, complex issues, and we've dealt with them in a pretty simplified way, but the fact remains that the core issue or the real debate is often one of scope. That is, it's not just that one group of people or the other is ignoring the other group's facts or denying reality. People on different sides of the issue are seeing the same facts and interpreting them differently because they're looking at them through different telescopes. If we don't address that fundamental difference first, then it's going to be really difficult to resolve the practical symptoms of that difference later. But it's not all heavy political stuff either. If you've ever endured a breakup and heard somebody say that there are plenty of other fish in the sea, then you've seen somebody try to enlarge your scope to see beyond the narrow loss of one relationship and to consider the broader possibilities of other relationships. Or if you're the kind of person who buys a larger, more expensive bottle of soap in order to save money in the long run, then you're probably working with a broader scope than a person who opts for the smaller, less expensive bottle to save money now. In other words, whenever you see a difference in human behavior, it's likely going to be the result of differing interpretations of the world that are a result of differences in scope. So you can scream at someone and call them bad and stupid until they do what you want, or more productively, you can work to understand their scope and their perspective, see how it influences their actions, and then work together in order to reconcile your differences in perspective, and then take steps towards practical solutions. But again, who are we kidding? This is the internet after all, and we've been having civil, responsible discussions this whole time. Okay, that's it. We could probably say more, but that would also likely take us beyond the scope of this video. The basic point is that the scope that you use to define a situation will then determine your possible interpretations of that situation, and there are way too many debates now that get stuck because people aren't paying attention to those underlying differences in scope. So with an understanding of scope, you're in a much better position to make more meaningful and productive contributions to the debates that matter to you, because you'll be able to go right to the heart of the issue instead of just yelling about its most obvious symptoms. And as always, thanks for being with us today. If you have any questions, comments, or insights, drop them below, and give us a like if you learned something useful. Now go use your rhetorical powers for good, and I'll see you in the next one.